animals have a time for waking and a time for sleeping. Some spend the daylight hours in search of food and sleep at night. Others reverse this pattern, feeding at night and sleeping during the day. Plants, too, follow a regular day-night rhythm. The flowers of some open only after sunset and close at dawn. Others open after the sun is up and close at night. Man's schedule of activities is dependent upon his mechanical clocks. But how do other animals and plants know when it is time to be awake and asleep?
Animal Secrets. Biological Clocks with Dr. Lauren Isley, University of Pennsylvania.
How does an animal know what time it is? Do animals have internal clocks which regulate their activities? What is this built-in clock, and how does it keep time? Is it possible to reset these biological clocks? Is there an external force to which they are responsible? To discover the answers to these questions, scientists are conducting many experiments with animals and plants to test their hypotheses. One noted scientist in the field is Dr. Colin S. Pittendrigg of Princeton University. To study the biological rhythms of hamsters, Dr. Pittendrigg placed them in cages with food, water, and a place to nest. One very important part of the cage was a running wheel, a special kind of wheel in which an animal can run for exercise. Automatic counters attached to the wheel enabled scientists to find out just when and how frequently the wheel was used. The hamsters were kept for weeks under constant light, then for weeks in complete darkness. Yet their habits remained the same. They continued to awaken regularly on a nearly 24-hour schedule. Thus, the scientists learned that the waking and sleeping hours do not depend on regular periods of daylight and darkness. Instead, their habits seem to be controlled by some kind of natural rhythms that operate within the animals themselves. Because the period of activity seemed to happen about every 24 hours, scientists called it a circadian rhythm. Circadian meaning about a day. They call whatever causes this rhythm a biological clock. One animal which has been studied intensively by Dr. Frank A. Brown of Northwestern University is the fiddler crab. Dr. Brown believes that external forces may regulate biological clocks. He noted that the fiddler crab is dark in color during the day and light in color at night. For 2 months in Dr. Brown's laboratory, a large number of crabs were kept in complete darkness at constant temperature. At regular times of day and night, a single crab was removed from the dark room and examined. What do you think the scientists discovered? The crabs removed in daylight were dark in color. Those removed while it was night were light in color. This showed that the biological clock persisted without the sunlight. The crabs continued to change color by day and by night, just as they would have on the seashore. The experiments of Dr. Brown revealed still other important data about biological clocks. When the temperature of the water was kept near freezing for 6 hours, the biological clock was set back 6 hours. In other words, if the crab ordinarily became darker at 6 o'clock in the morning, after chilling, the color change took place at noon, 6 hours later. Dr. Brown also wondered whether the crabs would maintain in the laboratory the rhythms of the beach. Could the crabs in the laboratory tell when it was high tide or low tide? The crabs were placed in plastic cups, balanced so they would tip when the crab moved around. When the crab moved, a switch closed and caused a pen to mark a moving strip of paper. When these records were examined, it was found that the crabs in the laboratory were active at the same time that the crabs on the beach were active, and quiet when the crabs on the beach were quiet. Removed from their natural environments, without the obvious clues of moon and tide, how did these little crabs keep accurate time? Dr. Brown believes that the only plausible explanation is that these creatures obtain information as to the moon's position through some subtle channel, responding with incredible sensitivity to a steady inflow of rhythmic information from the environment. In Dr. Pittendrig's laboratory at Princeton University, scientists are testing another theory. Their investigations have led them to conclude that biological clocks are internal timing devices implanted genetically into every living organism. One of the experiments conducted in the laboratory involved the life cycle of the fruit fly. The fruit fly is a tiny insect that passes rapidly through the 4 stages of its development: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. The eggs laid in decaying fruit hatch in one day as tiny maggots, which feed on the fruit. After 6 to 8 days, they become pupae, a resting stage during which they are transformed into adults. The adults, almost without exception, emerge from pupa cases shortly after sunrise. They are small and delicate. One of the most important factors in their survival is adequate moisture. For an hour after emerging, the fruit fly is in danger of drying out while its soft, wet body and wings become shaped and hardened. If the fruit fly were to emerge in dry air, it would die within a short time. Fortunately, its biological clock is set so that it emerges at a time of day when the air is cool and moist, when its chances of survival are greatest. Fruit flies also show an interesting kind of clock setting. When all stages of the life cycle were kept in complete darkness, equal numbers of adults emerged at all hours of the day. When, however, developing fruit flies are kept in complete darkness and then exposed to a brief flash of light during any stage after the egg stage, all of the adults later emerge at a time of day fixed by the flash of light. The biological clocks of the developing fruit flies are reset by the light flash. Having been deprived of the cues of a regular sunrise, the fruit flies made use of the light flash as a substitute for dawn and emerged as a result of a circadian rhythm set by this cue. We have seen that the activities of hamsters, crabs, and insects seem to be directed by biological clocks, and that scientists have differing theories about these clocks. But what about man? Do human beings also have biological clocks? Man is not an exception. Studies have shown that man's internal bodily processes have a definite rhythm. For example, man's body temperature drops steadily at night, reaching its lowest point of about 97.7 degrees Fahrenheit early in the morning. Then his temperature rises steadily, reaching a high point of about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit late in the afternoon. This is a steady rhythm which repeats itself in every 24-hour period, day after day, unless disturbed by illness. Other rhythms in humans are also known. Changes in pulse rate, for example, and changes in blood pressure. But what happens to man's biological clock when he must adapt to daylight hours in different time zones? It is easy for man to reset his mechanical watch, but what about his biological clock? What happens to his biological rhythms as he travels rapidly across a continent in a modern jet plane? Experiments have shown that a man can change his habits of waking and sleeping to adjust to a new time zone in just a few days. But body temperature, blood pressure, and other internal processes may take several weeks to adjust to the new time. We find that man tires easily and is less efficient during this adjustment. Astronauts cannot use the Earth's day as a guide to time. These men can circle the Earth in 90 minutes. Their days and nights in space last only 36 minutes per night and 54 minutes per day. Adjustments in space seem even more difficult than adjustments on Earth. Teams of astronauts on long flights tried different schedules for working and sleeping, but they were physically and mentally exhausted when they returned to Earth. These experiences suggest that the setting of our biological rhythms seems actually to be controlled by the length of time we are exposed to a light source between periods of darkness. White light is really a mixture of all of the colors produced by different wavelengths of light. Does the color of light have any effect on the setting of biological clocks? Does the color of early morning sunrises or of evening sunsets influence the metabolism of organic life? Dr. Robert Stones at Michigan Technological University has attempted to find the answer by experimenting with bats. Bats were selected for the experiments because their body temperatures show a very precise rhythm. When not fed and inactive, the bat's body temperature is similar to its surroundings. When a bat is feeding and active, its temperature may go as high as 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Earlier experiments of exposure to sources of white light. The bats in cages were lighted by red, blue, green, and yellow lights at different times. The changes in the body temperatures of the bats were measured. The results indicate that each component of white light does have an effect on biological clocks. The animals responded to wavelengths of very low intensity. Periodic rhythms have been recognized for many years, but only within the last 2 decades have scientists found that rhythms persist in many living things, even without the usual environmental changes in light, temperature, humidity, and air pressure. How could scientists isolate an animal and keep it free from all of the natural rhythms found in the Earth environment? Such an experiment could be conducted in space. This would help to determine whether biological clocks were endogenous, that is, acting within the organism, or whether they are dependent on environmental factors, that is, exogenous, responding to an outside force. To accomplish an experiment in deep space, and therefore be free of the geophysical forces on Earth, an interesting spaceflight experiment was prepared. It made use of the pocket mouse to find out if circadian rhythms persist during prolonged orbital flight. This mammal is particularly well suited for the circadian rhythm experiment. The pocket mouse has good rhythm. It needs no water and has an extremely low waste output. The space capsule into which the mice were placed had an environmental control system and automatically provided food. In addition, it supplied a life-supporting atmosphere for the mice to breathe and maintained a constant temperature of 78 degrees Fahrenheit, as well as constant pressure. The mice were kept in darkness during the entire time. In this capsule, 6 pocket mice traveled in an orbit around the Earth. Continually, their body temperatures were monitored by means of a small telemeter, which was especially developed for implanting into each of the small animals. Temperature measurements transmitted from each of the telemeters were converted into a series of pulses accumulated in the data storage tape recorder. The data was then transmitted to the ground station on command via radio signal to the satellite. Interest in biological clocks has led some scientists to seek the control centers of the clocks in living things. The common cockroach, which usually becomes active after dark, was the subject of one investigation. Could the control center of this insect's rhythmic activity be located and removed? Could the investigators actually interrupt the animal's biological time sense by a delicate operation? A particular group of brain cells were removed from the cockroach. The cockroach remained alive, but it no longer followed its usual rhythm by day and being active by night. What relationship is there between the animal's brain and its biological clock? We don't know. We have to find out. Experiments have suggested to some scientists that biological clocks might in some cases be a part of every living cell, the tiniest known unit of light. Using electron microscopes, scientists have studied individual living cells and observed a rhythmic change that occurs in the cell nucleus. The nucleus changes in size, becoming smallest at midday and largest at midnight. At the Argonne National Laboratory, Dr. Charles Ehret and Dr. John Will are studying the circadian rhythms in single-celled organisms such as Paramecium. Under the microscope, we can see one-celled animals come together and exchange tiny bits of material in a primitive kind of mating. This normally occurs in the daytime. Dr. Ehret found that the clock which controlled the rhythm seemed to lose time when these one-celled animals were kept in constant darkness. By exposing the cells to light, even for a brief period, it was possible to reset their biological clocks. White light, as we know, is composed of a rainbow of colors, and in order to determine the effectiveness of each color or wavelength of light in resetting the cell's clock, cultures were grown under this huge 20-foot biospectrograph. These experiments are directed toward determining which part of the cell is responsible for setting the circadian rhythms. The evidence seems to suggest to the researchers involvement of large DNA molecules. These are the molecules that contain the coded information or blueprints that direct the cell's production of proteins essential to life's activities. To examine these molecules at different times during the circadian cycle, cells are removed from the medium by a large automatic centrifuge. When all the water has been removed from cells, chemicals are used to aid in the extraction of DNA. These long molecules are then spooled out of the solution and collected like cotton fibers on the end of a glass stirring rod. Dr. Ehret believes that the setting of the cell's clock may be determined by the time it takes the DNA to transcribe the blueprint which the cell uses in its production of protein. When certain wavelengths of light strike the cell, the transcription seems to be interrupted and forced back to the beginning. Could this explain light's effectiveness in resetting the cell's clock? So we see that a biological clock, once set in motion, continues in a rhythm of about a day. We have seen also that some living things are sensitive to changes in light and temperature, and that these play a role in setting biological clocks. Are there not many other physical forces to which the clocks of living things respond? Answers to these questions and many more lie in future experimentation with plants and animals. These studies can provide man with greater security in his constantly changing environment on Earth and later on in space. More importantly, perhaps, these rhythms can tell us a little of the unseen tides of energy in which we are constantly bathed from birth to death. It has been truly said, and to say it is not to lessen the miracle, that we are compounded of dust and the light of a star.
Animal Secrets programs on 16mm film are available reasonably for schools and libraries. For information on Animal Secrets films and on government aid to schools for the purchase of audiovisual and instructional material, write to Animal Secrets, the Graphic Curriculum Incorporated, 41 East 42nd Street, New York, New York, 10017.